At 73 years old, I thought I had given my family everything, my dreams, my savings, my entire life. But when Christmas dinner arrived at my doorstep in a styrofoam container, I realized I had been living as a stranger in my own story. If this resonates with you, please like this video and subscribe for more inspiring stories. My name is Dorothy, and for the past 15 years, I have been the invisible foundation holding my family together. At 73, I should be sharing stories of adventures across Europe, showing photos of sunsets over the Mediterranean, or reminiscing about morning coffee in Parisian cafes. Instead, I sit in my small apartment in suburban Ohio, surrounded by travel brochures that have yellowed with age and dreams that have been carefully folded away like old linens. It started when my husband Robert passed away suddenly at 58. Heart attack, they said. One moment he was fixing the kitchen faucet, humming an old Beatles song, and the next moment he was gone. The life insurance barely covered the funeral expenses, and I found myself alone with a mortgage, 2 adult children drowning in their own financial struggles, and a grandson who needed college tuition money. Michael, my eldest son, had always been the dreamer in the family. He started 3 different businesses that failed, each time coming to me with promises that this would be the last time he needed help. Sarah, my daughter, married young to a man who turned out to be more interested in spending money than earning it. When they divorced, she moved back home with little Emma, who was only 7 then. I had been a high school English teacher for 35 years, and my pension was modest but steady. Robert and I had saved diligently for retirement, planning to travel to all those places we had pinned on our world map. Ireland, where his grandparents came from. Italy, where I had dreamed of taking an art history tour. Australia, just because it seemed so wonderfully far away from everything familiar. But dreams, I learned, are fragile things. They crumble easily under the weight of necessity. The first sacrifice seemed small. Michael needed $5,000 to keep his restaurant afloat. "Just a loan, Mom," he said, his eyes desperate in the way that reminded me of when he was 8 and had broken Mrs. Henderson's window with a baseball. "I'll pay you back with interest." The restaurant closed 6 months later, and the money was gone. Then Sarah needed help with Emma's medical bills when she broke her arm in 2 places during a gymnastics competition. Then there was the down payment for Sarah's apartment when she finally found a job. Then Michael's second business venture, a landscaping company that seemed promising until the equipment was repossessed. Each time, I told myself it was temporary. Each time, I moved a little more money from my travel fund to their immediate needs. The stack of travel brochures grew thicker, but my savings account grew thinner. By the time Emma started high school, I had become the family's financial safety net. Not just for big emergencies, but for everything. Michael's car repairs, Sarah's grocery bills when she was between jobs, Emma's school supplies, clothes, and activity fees. I paid for Emma's prom dress, her SAT prep courses, and eventually her college application fees. I never complained. How could I? These were my children, my granddaughter. If I didn't help them, who would? I watched other women my age posting photos from cruise ships and European river tours on Facebook, and I felt a familiar ache in my chest. But I pushed it down, the way I had learned to push down so many feelings over the years. The irony wasn't lost on me. As an English teacher, I had spent decades teaching students about sacrifice in literature. Sidney Carton in A Tale of Two Cities, giving his life so another could live. Sacrifice was noble in books, heroic even. In real life, it was quieter, more mundane, and infinitely more costly. I sold the house Robert and I had shared for 28 years. Too many memories, I told everyone, but the truth was simpler. I needed the money. I moved into a small 2-bedroom apartment, keeping one room for when Emma visited, though she rarely did anymore. College had opened up a whole new world for her, and I was proud of that. Proud that my sacrifices had given her opportunities I never had. But pride, I was learning, was a cold companion on long winter evenings. The calls always came at inconvenient times. Sunday mornings when I was trying to enjoy my coffee and read the paper. Tuesday evenings when I was watching my favorite cooking show. Friday afternoons when I was looking forward to a quiet weekend. "Mom, I hate to ask, but..." Michael's voice would begin, and I would already be reaching for my checkbook. The landscaping business had failed, and now he was working part-time at Home Depot while trying to start a handyman service. The gap between his income and expenses seemed to grow wider each month. Sarah had found steady work as a dental hygienist, which should have been good news. But steady work came with steady expenses, and somehow there was always something. The car needed new tires. The apartment's heating bill was higher than expected. Emma needed a laptop for college. Each request was reasonable on its own, but together they formed a constant drain on my resources. I started cutting corners in my own life. Generic brands instead of name brands. Coupons clipped religiously from the Sunday paper. I canceled my cable subscription and learned to live with basic channels. I stopped going to the hair salon and bought box dye from the drugstore. My nails, once professionally manicured every month, grew long, and I learned to file them myself. The travel brochures mocked me from their drawer. I had collected them for years, carefully organizing them by continent and season. The Scottish Highlands in summer, Christmas markets in Germany, cherry blossom season in Japan. I knew them all by heart, had read every description until I could recite the hotel amenities and tour highlights from memory. Sometimes, late at night, I would spread them out on my kitchen table and plan imaginary trips. I would calculate exchange rates, research weather patterns, and plot itineraries with the same careful attention I had once given to lesson plans. It was a bittersweet ritual, but it kept the dreams alive, even if they were slowly suffocating under the weight of reality. My few remaining friends from school would invite me to their retirement parties, their vacation send-offs, their grandchildren's graduations. I attended when I could, but it became increasingly difficult to listen to their stories of adventure and leisure when my own life felt like a series of financial calculations and worried phone calls. "Dorothy, you should come with us on the Mediterranean cruise next spring," my former colleague Janet suggested one afternoon over coffee. "There's still room, and you'd love the Greek islands." I smiled and said I'd think about it, but we both knew I wouldn't. The cruise cost more than I had spent on myself in the past 2 years. Besides, what if Michael's business finally took off and he needed startup capital? What if Sarah's car broke down? What if Emma needed help with graduate school applications? There was always a what if that kept me tethered to home, to my phone, to my checkbook. I began to notice how my conversations with my children had changed. They used to call to share news, to ask about my day, to tell me about Emma's achievements or funny things that had happened at work. Now the calls were transactional. They needed something, I provided it, and we would hang up until the next need arose. I told myself this was normal. This was what families did. But deep down, I was beginning to feel like a bank rather than a mother, a resource rather than a person. The breaking point came on a rainy Thursday in November. I was at the grocery store, carefully calculating the cost of each item, when I ran into Mrs. Chen, who had taught math at our school for 40 years. She was practically glowing with excitement. "Dorothy, I just got back from 3 weeks in New Zealand. It was absolutely magical. The South Island, the fjords, the mountains. And next month, I'm going to Thailand with my sister. You should see the photos." She showed me picture after picture on her phone. Her face was radiant, her eyes bright with the joy of discovery. She looked 10 years younger than her 71 years. "What about you, dear? Any travel plans?" I stood there in the cereal aisle, holding a box of generic cornflakes, and felt something crack inside my chest. "Not right now," I managed to say. "Family obligations, you know." Mrs. Chen's expression softened with understanding, but I saw something else there too. Pity, maybe, or recognition of a path not taken. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with my bank statement and a calculator. I had been supporting my family for 15 years, and my savings account was nearly empty. My checking account had just enough to cover my basic expenses for the next month. The stack of travel brochures seemed to mock me from their drawer. I was 73 years old, and I had nothing left to show for my dreams except a collection of glossy pamphlets and a growing sense that I had somehow lost myself in the process of taking care of everyone else. Christmas had always been my favorite holiday. When Robert was alive, we would spend weeks preparing, decorating the house with care, planning menus, and wrapping presents with elaborate bows. Our home was the gathering place for the whole family. warm and welcoming, filled with the sounds of laughter and the smells of traditional cooking. After Robert died, I tried to maintain those traditions. I would still decorate my small apartment, though the tree was smaller now, and I would still prepare a full Christmas dinner, even though the guest list had dwindled. It was important to me to keep the family together, to create those moments of connection that seemed increasingly rare throughout the year. This year felt different from the start. It was December 15th when Michael called with the news that changed everything. "Mom, I have some great news," he said, his voice more animated than I had heard in months. "Jennifer's parents invited us to spend Christmas at their cabin in Colorado. It's this amazing place in the mountains, and they've been planning it for months. Jennifer's whole family will be there, and they really want me to be part of it." Jennifer was Michael's girlfriend of 8 months, a nice woman who worked in marketing and seemed to have a stabilizing effect on him. I was happy he had found someone, but the timing of this announcement felt like a punch to the stomach. "What about our Christmas dinner?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "I've already bought the turkey, and I was planning to make your favorite stuffing." "I know, Mom, and I'm sorry, but this is really important for my relationship with Jennifer. Her family is pretty well off, and I think her dad might help me with my business ideas. It's a real opportunity." I hung up the phone feeling hollow. Michael had never missed Christmas dinner, not once in 45 years. 2 days later, Sarah called with her own announcement. "Mom, I have something to tell you. Emma's boyfriend's family invited us to their Christmas celebration in Chicago. They're flying us out and everything. Emma's so excited, and honestly, I could use a break from cooking and all the holiday stress." "But what about our tradition?" I asked, hearing the desperation creeping into my voice. "What about our Christmas?" "Oh, Mom, we'll make it up to you. Maybe we can have a late Christmas celebration when we get back." You understand, right? This is important for Emma's relationship, and his family is really impressive. His father is a doctor, and his mother is a lawyer. It's good for Emma to see different possibilities. I understood all too well. My children had found better offers, more impressive families, more promising opportunities. I was no longer the center of their Christmas universe. I was the consolation prize they could reschedule for their convenience. On Christmas Eve, I sat in my decorated apartment, looking at the tree I had carefully trimmed with ornaments collected over decades. Each one held a memory. The handmade angels Michael and Sarah had crafted in elementary school, the glass snowflakes Robert had bought during our trip to Vermont, the wooden reindeer Emma had painted when she was 6. I had prepared a small meal for myself, but I wasn't hungry. The silence in the apartment was deafening. Outside, snow was falling softly, and I could see the warm glow of lights from neighboring apartments where families were gathering, sharing meals, creating memories. My phone buzzed with text messages throughout the evening. Photos from Colorado showing Michael and Jennifer's family around a massive stone fireplace. Pictures from Chicago showing Sarah, Emma, and what looked like a magazine-perfect family gathered around an elegant dining table. Everyone looked happy, radiant, included. I sent back responses full of heart emojis and exclamation points, telling them how wonderful everything looked, how happy I was for them. But inside, I felt like I was disappearing. Christmas morning arrived gray and quiet. I made coffee and sat in my favorite chair, watching the snow continue to fall. The presents I had wrapped for my family sat under the tree, waiting for a celebration that wouldn't come. At noon, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find a delivery driver holding a styrofoam container. "Dorothy Mitchell?" he asked, checking his phone. "I have a delivery for you." I signed for the package, confused. Inside was a portion of turkey, some stuffing, a scoop of mashed potatoes, and a dinner roll. There was a note written in Sarah's handwriting. "Merry Christmas, Mom. We saved you some dinner. Love you." I stood in my kitchen, holding the container of leftover food, and felt something break inside me. This was what my sacrifices had earned me. This was the value my family placed on my presence in their lives. I wasn't worth a seat at their table, but I was worth their leftover food, delivered like a charity case. I sat at my kitchen table and opened the container. The turkey was dry, the stuffing cold, the mashed potatoes congealed. But it wasn't the food that made me cry. It was the realization that I had spent 15 years giving everything I had to people who saw me as an afterthought, a convenient source of support that could be easily replaced or forgotten when something better came along. I threw the food away without taking a bite. For the first time in 15 years, I was angry, not just disappointed or hurt, but genuinely angry. I had given up my dreams, my savings, my independence, my future, and this was my reward. Leftovers in a styrofoam container, delivered by a stranger on Christmas Day. That night, I pulled out my travel brochures for the first time in months. But instead of planning imaginary trips, I started making real ones. I had nothing left to lose, and maybe, just maybe, it was time to start living for myself. The weeks following Christmas were a blur of difficult conversations and painful realizations. I spent New Year's Eve alone, but for the first time in years, I felt a strange sense of hope. As the clock struck midnight, I made a resolution that surprised even me. I was going to stop being everyone else's safety net and start being my own priority. The first step was the hardest. I called Michael and Sarah and told them I needed to talk to them both. We met at a coffee shop downtown, neutral territory where I hoped I could find the courage to say what needed to be said. "I've been thinking a lot since Christmas," I began, my hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had grown cold while I gathered my courage. "I need to make some changes." Michael shifted uncomfortably. "Mom, if this is about Christmas, I told you we'd make it up to you. Jennifer's family really liked me, and her dad might invest in my new business idea." "It's not about Christmas specifically," I said, though we all knew it was. "It's about everything. For 15 years, I've been supporting you both financially and emotionally, and I've lost myself in the process." Sarah looked defensive. "We never asked you to give up your dreams, Mom. You chose to help us." "You're right," I said, and I saw surprise flicker across both their faces. "I did choose to help you, but I also chose to enable you. I made it too easy for you to depend on me instead of finding your own solutions." I took a deep breath before continuing. "I'm 73 years old, and I have very little savings left. I've given up everything I wanted to do with my life to make sure you were comfortable, and I can't do it anymore." The conversation that followed was painful, but necessary. There were tears, accusations, and long silences. Michael accused me of abandoning the family. Sarah said I was being selfish after all these years of being supportive. But I held firm. "I'm not abandoning anyone," I said. "I'm choosing to live my own life while I still can. I'm going to travel, and I'm going to stop being your financial backup plan. You're both adults with your own careers and capabilities. It's time for all of us to act like it." The next month was difficult. My children barely spoke to me, and when they did, their voices were cold and formal. I felt guilty, but I also felt something I hadn't experienced in years: freedom. I started small. I went to the bank and opened a new savings account, one that would be exclusively for my own use. I canceled my home phone, the one my children used to call whenever they needed money. I bought a small flip phone and gave the number only to a few close friends. Then I did something that felt both terrifying and exhilarating. I booked a trip. It wasn't the elaborate European tour I had dreamed of for decades. It was a simple, week-long trip to Ireland, a place Robert and I had always planned to visit together. I found a small bed and breakfast in County Cork, arranged for a rental car, and bought a guidebook that I read cover to cover. The trip was everything I had hoped for and more. I drove through rolling green hills, visited ancient stone circles, and spent hours in cozy pubs talking to locals who were delighted to share stories about their homeland. I took hundreds of photos, not for social media or to show others, but for myself, to remember every moment of this adventure I had finally claimed. On my last night in Ireland, I sat in a pub in the village of Dingle, listening to traditional music and watching couples dance. An elderly man at the bar struck up a conversation with me. "You're traveling alone?" he asked, his accent thick with the musical cadence of the Irish countryside. "Yes," I said, and for the first time I felt proud of that fact rather than embarrassed by it. "Good for you," he said, raising his pint in a toast. "Too many people wait for permission to live their lives. You're doing it right." When I returned home, I felt like a different person. I had color in my cheeks, stories to tell, and a renewed sense of who I was beyond my role as mother and grandmother. My children were waiting for me, and I could see the shock on their faces when they saw how happy I looked. "Mom, you look different," Sarah said, and I could hear the confusion in her voice. "I feel different," I said. "I feel like myself again." Emma, who had returned from college for spring break, was the first to really understand. "Grandma, you look amazing. Tell me about Ireland." As I shared photos and stories, I watched my granddaughter's face light up with excitement. She asked questions about the places I had visited, the people I had met, the experiences I had gained. For the first time in years, I was interesting to her not because of what I could provide, but because of what I had experienced. Over the following months, my relationship with my children slowly began to heal. It wasn't the same as it had been, but it was healthier. They learned to solve their own problems, to budget their own money, to stand on their own feet. Michael's new business actually succeeded, partly because he had to work harder when he couldn't rely on my financial support. Sarah got a promotion at work and started saving for her own future. I continued to travel, taking 3 more trips that year. I went to Italy, where I took an art history course I had dreamed about for decades. I visited the Canadian Rockies, where I hiked trails I never thought I would be strong enough to handle. I even took a short cruise to Alaska, where I watched whales breach in the frigid waters and felt more alive than I had in years. The most surprising change was in my relationship with Emma. Now in her junior year of college, she started calling me regularly, not to ask for money, but to hear about my adventures. She said I had inspired her to study abroad, to take risks, to not wait for life to happen to her. "You know what, Grandma?" she said during one of our calls. "I never realized how cool you were until you started living your own life instead of just living for everyone else." On my 74th birthday, my family threw me a surprise party. But instead of the quiet, home-cooked meal I had expected, they had planned something different. They had made a slideshow of all my travel photos, and Sarah had compiled a scrapbook of my adventures. Michael had even researched a photography class he thought I might enjoy. "We wanted to celebrate the new you," Sarah said, tears in her eyes. "The woman who taught us that it's never too late to chase your dreams." As I looked around the room at my family, I realized that by saving myself, I had actually saved them too. I had taught them independence, resilience, and the importance of pursuing their own happiness. Most importantly, I had shown them that love doesn't require sacrifice of self, but rather the courage to be authentically who you are. That Christmas, we celebrated together again, but it was different. Instead of me doing all the cooking and planning, everyone contributed. Instead of me giving expensive gifts I couldn't afford, we exchanged meaningful, thoughtful presents. Instead of me being the caretaker, I was simply a beloved member of the family, valued for who I was, not what I could provide. As I sat at our Christmas table, surrounded by the people I loved most, I thought about the woman I had been just 1 year before, the woman who had received leftovers in a styrofoam container, who had felt invisible and taken for granted, who had given up her dreams for the sake of others' comfort. That woman was gone, replaced by someone who had learned that the most important journey isn't the one you take to exotic places, but the one you take back to yourself. I had traveled thousands of miles around the world, but the most important trip I had taken was the one that led me home to who I was meant to be. Sometimes the greatest adventure is simply learning to live your own life instead of everyone else's.